In today's show, I'm looking at buy low trades, players who are currently trending a little bit under where they could be the rest of the season. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's show is also brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. All right, so what we're doing today, looking at some buy low trade options. Let's get cracking straight into them right now. So for category leagues, I'm going to put Wendell Carter Jr. on this list. Now, the last three games before the break, Carter had some real stinkers. A 2.5 rebound game against the Suns, an 8.3 rebound game against the Nuggets. He was better against the Pelicans. He only shot 27% in that game, but 15 boards, 7 points in 28 minutes. Prior to those three games, he had a 17-10 double-double with 2 steals and 2 blocks, an 18-13 double-double with 2 steals and 3 blocks, granted against the Rockets and the Wolves, horrendous teams, and he'd looked really good, I thought, since coming back from his injury. Now, there is talk that the Bulls might be interested in Andre Drummond, which would be a very Garpax-type move. Now, he's not there, so I'm not sure Karnisovas is that dumb in terms of making a move to get an expiring Andre Drummond while nerfing a player who you've been consistently nerfing throughout his career anyway. But what that could mean is that Carter maybe is on the move. But regardless, his value is low at the moment. I think you shouldn't be looking at him to be a top 50 player this season. There's no way that'll be the case. Actually, that's not true. There's a small chance it's the case. But I'd be looking at him as an option where his value is nerfing. The Andre Drummond rumors will have people worried. So you can get him for the cost of the worst player on your team, perhaps. Maybe the 2 worst players on your team in a 2-for-1 deal. I think we look at him as a top 100 guy with top 70 upside and top 50 upside in absolute 1% best case scenario. Probably requires a trade to get there. But I liked what I saw outside of those last 3 games from Wendell Carter. John Wall is someone worth mentioning because over the last month, he's the 150th ranked player. Over the last 2 weeks, he's the 183rd ranked player. Over the last week, he's the 226th ranked player. It's somehow getting worse for Wall. Why? Well, the shot he can't shoot. It's simple as that. 27% from 3 in his last 4 games, 39.6% from the field, 69.7% from the line.
Giggity!
That's a true shooting of 48.9% for those of you calculating this as we go. That's rough. He's also only averaging 5.5 assists per game. This was the John Wall that averaged 10 assists per game for 3 consecutive seasons. And in his last year before injury, averaged 8.7. That's not a Harden factor. That's just a John Wall factor because Harden played 8 games for the Rockets? Wall's played 25 and the assists are going down. He's also averaging under a steal per game. And back in his heyday, he was a 2 steals per game player. Now, am I suggesting that he's going to be a 10 assists and 2 steals guy? He's not even close to that. But I feel better. I feel like he's not going to be a 69% free throw shooter. I feel like he's not going to be a 39% field goal guy. I feel like he can maybe get to 7 assists per game. I feel like he can maybe get to 1.2, 1.3 steals per game. He is really damaging at the moment. I don't think he's any risk to be traded. He has high usage. He has high minutes. It's just needing a few of those things to turn around, and I think they can. Let's look about Jaylen Brown, who, again, was on my sell high list for many, many weeks. And the reason he was on my sell high list is because of what he's doing at the moment. But now the pendulum swings. He's the 99th ranked player over the last 2 weeks, 167th over the last week. Why? Because his percentages have fallen off. He's at 44% from the field in his last 7. He's at 79 from the line, which is okay, but 31% from 3. He's not getting any steals. He's blocked 1 shot in his last 7 games. Those are numbers that were much higher for him earlier this year. I think we're not viewing him as a top 20, a top 30 player. He's probably a top 50 player, but you don't trade a top 50 player back. And if you can't get him for a top 50 player in it, so if you can't get him for like a top 60 player in a trade, you don't do it. Because there is a chance that he doesn't end the season from here on out as a top 50 player. There is a real chance of that. especially considering over the last 2 months, he's been the 59th ranked player. So don't look at him as the 41st ranked player over the course of the season. Remember, that was without Kemba for a lot of that. That was without Jason Tatum for some of that. That was while shooting unsustainable levels of 2-point production, where he was hitting like 58% of his mid-range twos or something crazy like that. That stuff isn't going to stick, so don't view him that way. View him as a top 50, a top 60 player. Send that top 70, top 80 guy back in a trade and see what you can do. But he has swung a little bit too far in terms of his production, where I think it can turn back around. Why would you bother going into your local chain auto store? It's a waste of time. Like, you go in there, there's so many makes and models and parts for cars that the guy in the store can't keep it all in stock at once. He'll have to order it in. And when he's ordering it in, he's going to charge you more money than what you would normally pay, or what you would pay if you went to rockauto.com. Rockauto.com is a family business serving auto parts customers online for 20 years. You go to rockauto.com to shop for auto and body parts from hundreds of manufacturers. The rockauto.com catalog is unique and remarkably easy to navigate. You can quickly see all the parts available for your vehicle and choose the brands, specifications, and prices you prefer. And best of all, the prices at rockauto.com are always reliably low, and they're the same for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. Why spend up to twice as much for the same parts? Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. As my dog moves my microphone around. All right, next player on the list, Jordan Clarkson. Clarko, over the last week, is the 152nd ranked player. And he was another guy that was shooting unsustainably well. He didn't miss a free throw. Look, he still hasn't missed free throws. He's at 97% from the line. So there is going to be some regression there. But what we've seen recently is the insane shooting numbers have fallen off. And over the last 7 games, he's down to 42% from the field and 37% over his last 4, shooting 29% from 3. So Jordan Clarkson is a guy who goes on runs. He's a guy that has stretches of hot streaks and cold streaks. And at the minute, his shooting is in a massive cold streak. So what you know is going to happen over the next month is he's going to have a run where he hits 44% of his threes and 55% of his twos, and he averages 20 points in 24 minutes on a true shooting of 68%. Like, that's what he will do. So you try and trade for him now. You go low value because he was a top 60 player earlier this year. He's drifted out to 82nd. I think he's a 90 to 110 ranked player over the course of the year, but he's 152nd over the last week. So you try and throw some back-end type value for someone who's panicking, who's seeing the minutes and not happy with the production. Go for the impetuous player in your league who has Jordan Clarkson and see if you can just acquire some value. And even if you have to pay a top 90 player to get him, even though that's where I think he ends up rest of the season, he's going to have a hot streak that pushes him to top 50 for a 2 or 3 week period. So you get him, you get that hot streak out, and then you try and move on, and then you move him back into that sell high window. The next guy we talk about is Karl-Anthony Towns. So why is he a sell high? Well, over his last 3 weeks, he's the 74th ranked player. So that's obviously not ideal. Why is he that bad? Well, he wasn't hitting shots. 28% from 3, 48% from 2, averaging 20 points on a 41% field goal. Like, that's rough. But no one believes Karl-Anthony Towns is outside the top 50. Surely nobody here believes he's outside the top 20. Although his last 14 games is the 11th ranked player. The reason he is here is because everyone is panicking. The Wolves are going to shut him down, guys. I read it. They're going to shut him down. He's just not going to play after the All-Star break, guys. Why would he? They're tanking. If you haven't noticed, the Wolves are shit anyway. Karl-Anthony Towns is good. It doesn't stop them from being shit. May he sit some games in May? Absolutely. Might the wrist actually get re-injured? Of course. That is a risk. There is no doubt about that. That is a risk. He is dealing with an injury. But for all of the talk of Karl-Anthony Towns, man, he's a pussy, he's so soft, it is bullshit. It's so far off the mark, and that means you can probably get him at a discount. Use his recent form, the 74th ranked player, outside the top 10 since he returned. Shutdowns, whatever. Guy, I just really need a big man. I need to make a boost. I need to make a run for things. And throw a top 30 player. Throw 2 top 50 players. Don't throw a top 10 player at Karl-Anthony Towns. Throw a top 20 and a top 70 player at Karl-Anthony Towns. And if he doesn't get shut down, or if he doesn't have injuries, I think he's going to be a top 4, top 5 player per game the rest of the way. It's a big win for you. But that's where you've got to just try and take advantage of prevailing narratives, I believe anyway. Let's now look at some buy low points league players. Tyler Hero.
Everyone has a hero.
True.
0 people shouldn't have a hero.
Yeah.
I don't think Hero's that good, personally. But over the last 2 weeks, he's averaging just 17 fantasy points per game. He is at 29 over the course of the year. And while that probably is more of a 27, 26 point per game player, he's definitely not a less than 20 fantasy point per game guy. In his last 4 games, he's averaging 7.5 points. He was dealing with a hip issue in that time. And there is the Jimmy Butler, Kendrick Nunn, Goran Dragic, all those guys returning, Bam Adebayo. That's going to have an impact on Hero. But I think we look at him as a 27 fantasy point per game guy. Maybe it's a 25 fantasy point per game player. But yeah, he's better than your worst player on your roster. He's a must-add if he's dropped. So just try and take advantage of maybe it's the pushback against hype that he receives. Paired that with his current reduction in performance. And I think there's something there. I've mentioned Wendell Carter Jr. as well, and I think it holds for points leagues, averaging just 19 fantasy points over the last week with those poor games that I mentioned earlier. He's more of a top 100 player, a 29 fantasy point per game guy. So you try and throw like a 25-point guy, a 24-point guy out there. You throw the Andre Drummond trade rumors around, or you casually mention them before you mention a trade or whatever it is with this guy. Now, you don't want to come, hey, guys, hey, mate, how's it going? How's your missus? How's your kids? How's your husband? Whatever, right? You throw all that out there, and then you go, hey, have you seen the Bulls? They want Andre Drummond. Mate, that's going to kill Wendell Carter. Can you send him to me? They're going to go, dude, why would you want him if you're talking shit about him? You've got to throw these things out in other areas. Post a link in your group chat. Man, what the hell? The Bulls, Andre Drummond. What is this? Andre Drummond, guys, he's coming back. A few days later, go to the Wendell Carter guy. Say, hey, I really like Wendell. Maybe the Bulls trade him to get Andre Drummond back. I really like him. Yeah, can I get something? You don't say he's trash. He's going to get completely reduced with Drummond coming in. You just try and throw something out there. Andy Wiggins. It's not that good, but he's averaging under 25 points the last 2 weeks, and it's getting worse. 22 points over the last week. This is a guy that averages almost 30 points per game this year. And his blocks, which were so high to begin the year, have just disappeared. He's blocked, 2 shots, I think, in his last 3 games? 2 shots in his last 8 games. And this is a dude that's going at over a block per game this season, so that's just way off. And we're talking about that's an extra 3 fantasy points per game, basically right there. And that takes him from 25 to 28. And the shooting's way off. He's averaging 14 real-life points in his last 8. That comes back up, and you get that to 16 points, 17 points is another 3 points. So it's an easy 6 fantasy points per game that can jump up from Wiggins. Target him for a guy outside the top 100, and look at him as a top 80 to 85 type player rest of the season. Mike Conley, in the All-Star game, it is going to be a little bit harder to buy low on an All-Star, but people will be scared. Injuries, man. Old. Hamstrings. He burnt me last year. He's 93rd over the last month since returning from his hamstring injury, averaging 28 fantasy points per game. And I have no idea why I said hamstring injury, like one word. It's not. 28 fantasy points per game for Conley since returning. I think he's a 31 to 32 fantasy point per game guy. I think he's a guy you should be viewing as a top 70 player, but you give up a top 90, top 95 player to get him. And the last guy we talk about here is Malcolm Brogdon. Yes, TJ Warren and Karis LeVert are going to have an impact on Brogdon, for sure. Right? He is averaging 38 fantasy points per game, and if you think he's going to do that, I reckon you're a little bit misguided. I think he's more of a 35 fantasy point per game, 36 fantasy point per game player. But over the last 2 weeks, he's under 30. The Warren and LeVert things are a worry. And pairing that with the recent form, I think you can get him at somewhat of a discount here. Throw him at top 75 player for Brogdon. I think that would be a win for you. Guys, BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Football might be over, but the NBA, college basketball, and the NHL are in full swing. BetOnline even covers awards, TV shows, and reality TV. Real-time updated odds and props on almost anything you can imagine. BetOnline has you covered for all the news, scores, and odds, and it's the best way to place your bets, and it's free to sign up. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. The website is betonline.ag. The promo code is locked on to get your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline are your online sportsbook experts. All right, so there's some buy low trade offers. I'm going to come back real soon with a sell high show. So stick around for that. And if you subscribe, you'll never miss it. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube. Give it a thumbs up, notification bell. Get in the chat, drop in the comments, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.